How has the UFO phenomena impacted people's ideas on religion, and has it had a significant influence on our modern technology? Dr. Diana Pasulka, a professor of religion at the University of North Carolina of Wilmington, joins me tonight to talk about this and about her latest book, American Cosmic: UFOs, Religion, and Technology. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. I'm your host, Curry Stegan, and so wonderful to be back with you again. Got a great episode in store for you tonight. As I stated before, Dr. Diana Pasulka is going to be joining me to talk about her latest work, American Cosmic: UFOs, Religion, and Technology. So it's going to be great to have a discussion and pick Diana's brain about the research she's done on this subject and its impact on religion and technology. If you've been paying attention in the media lately, the media's really been a buzz about the UFO issue, and there's been a lot of reporting going on in mainstream media, which is a really good sign in a lot of ways. There's been some really interesting recent developments. First, when questioned by a New York Times reporter about the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, DoD spokesman Christopher Sherwood stated that the DoD did have a program called ATIP that was involved with investigating UFOs. So this is really the first official statement by a DoD spokesman stating that this program existed and did involve the study of UFOs. So I think that's a very important development. Even though Luis Elizondo, who ran the ATIP program, has come out and spoke, and that late 2017 New York Times story broke. This is pretty significant because this is the first official statement basically admitting that the program exists. The Navy also came out and said they are now developing specific protocols for their pilots to report UFO sightings and encounters. So that's pretty interesting as well, because this is the first time they've really come out and said they're developing protocol for their pilots to actually report UFOs. So some pretty interesting developments in ufology. And the other thing I wanted to mention is I'm saddened by the passing of the late Stanton Friedman. Stanton Friedman has been called by many as the father of modern ufology. And he was really one of the first people to actually break the story of the Roswell incident that occurred back in 1947. Many consider Stanton a giant in the field of ufology. And Stanton, may you rest in peace. And thank you for all you did and all the amazing contributions to the study of UFOs. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I'm going to be joining the WFE Digital Broadcasting Radio Network team, and starting in July, I'm going to be doing weekly live shows on Sunday nights, starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Pacific. And looks like that first live episode will probably be on the 7th of July. And don't worry, you'll still be able to access the same great content you have in the past, but you'll also be able to tune into live shows on top of that. So all my live shows will be recorded and be provided on the same podcast sites and apps that they are now available on. So I think this is a very exciting opportunity to really grow the show, and I'm really excited about doing live shows. So hopefully you'll tune in as we start doing those live shows in July, and those are going to be available on the Spreaker network. So really looking forward to really growing the show and doing those live shows. I think this is exciting, and really looking forward to that. All right, moving on. If you haven't visited the website, please head over to passion, the number 4, theparanormal.com, and you can access past episodes there. And you can also blog about topics we've covered on past shows. And you can also check out some great books from past guests we've had on the show. So make sure you hop over there and visit the site. Also, make sure you visit the Facebook page at facebook.com/passion, the number 4, the paranormal. You can like and follow us there. And also, it'd be great if you're using the iTunes app, if you'd be willing to offer a review of the show. Anyone that does offer a review of the show, I'll actually read that review on the next episode. And so I'd really love that if you could spend the time, do a quick review of the show, and share a link with a friend. Let them know about the show so they can tune in. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into the discussion with Diana Pasulka, Dr. Diana Pasulka. She is also a professor of religion at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and is also a philosophy and religion chair of philosophy and religion there at the university. So it's going to be great talking with her. I really think you're going to love tuning into tonight's show, and I really hope you enjoy this episode. Okay, so my guest tonight is Dr. Diana Pasulka, and Dr. Pasulka is a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina of Wilmington, and she is also the chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion, and she's written several books, including her latest book, which we're going to talk about, and it's The American Cosmic, UFOs, Religion, and Technology. And she has also been a history and religious consultant for television and movies, to include The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2. Dr. Pasulka, thank you so much for joining me on the show tonight.
Happy to be here, Curry. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. It's amazing to have somebody with your academic credentials covering this topic. And one of the things I wanted to ask is, we seem to have this negative stigma still out there about, especially it seems like in academic and scientific circles, kind of this negative stigma for those who cover this topic. And I'm just wondering if you've dealt with that as well, and was that a concern for you when you started this the research for this book?
Right, that's a great question. So First, I have to tell you that as I didn't ever think I would write a book about the topic. I've been interested in religion since I was 11 years old, and kind of figured I'd end up doing something, I would be a professor of religion or something similar. And so I didn't end up doing this. So the question of the stigma associated with studying the paranormal or UFOs is real, and part of it has been orchestrated because it's a powerful topic. People like John Mack, who in the 1980s wrote about, he was actually a Harvard researcher. He was at the top of his field. He had won a Pulitzer Prize, so nobody really could trump in terms of academic credentials. Yet he wrote, after even winning the Pulitzer Prize, he wrote a book called Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. And he worked at Harvard as a research professor, which is the highest type of professor you could be. And he was, investigated by Harvard. And so he had to go through a review of his research, and it was shown that he won this investigation. He had impeccable methods and credentials, and he was basically just saying that this is something we don't understand, therefore we should study it. And if you look at books about scientific revolutions, namely like Kuhn's book about the paradigm shifts of scientific revolutions, you'll see that there are a few outlier professors or academics or scientists who go out and study something that other people think is kooky. And it turns out that what they're doing is they're just studying data that doesn't really fit into the paradigm of what we currently think we know. And that doesn't mean that the data is wrong. It just means that our paradigm needs to shift to try to understand it. And so these people get stigmatized. So what happened to me was that, this is, the 2000s. This isn't, I think when John Mack wrote his book, it was 1980s and 1990s, and the stigma was in place. And so by the time I got, to write my book, which is in 2012, I began the research. I felt comfortable doing it. One of the reasons I felt comfortable doing it was that I was a full professor. So you have, if you look at professors, there are assistant professors, associate professors, full professors, chairs of departments, and things like that. And I had won, more than $1 million in grants. So I was already at the top of the field in terms of what I could do. So I didn't feel like anybody could fire me. We have what in academia is called academic freedom. And so I'm able to study something like this and not be fired for doing it, especially if the methods I use are sound, and they are sound. I published with Oxford University Press, which is, the oldest press for academics, or for anyone actually in the Western world. So I felt comfortable doing it. Now, that doesn't mean that I would suggest that a young academic or an assistant professor do this or undertake this. I wouldn't, actually. I don't think they'd get a job. So, the stigma is still there, but I'm ensconced enough in my field to be able to study it.
Right, and that's reassuring, I'm sure, to kind of have that. Now, does that mean you're?
I agree.
Does that also mean you're a tenured?
It doesn't mean I haven't been beamed for it, though. I have. A lot of my colleagues, raised an eyebrow, but since then, I've been asked by NASA and the Library of Congress to apply for positions there, and I've gotten, reviews. I have just, the amount of good publicity that the book has generated by scientists. It was number one on Amazon in the field of astrophysics for a while. So, it's like scientists are interested in this. And in fact, the book is about scientists who believe in this, and people in Silicon Valley, biotechnologists who believe this. So it's no longer a fringe topic. And I think that's the difference with my book, is that when John Mack wrote his book, it was completely a fringe topic. And he put his reputation out there on the line. This guy's a hero. By the time I come along and write about it, what I'm basically saying is that this is something that so many people believe in. More than 50% of Americans and 80% of young people believe in this. So it is no longer a fringe topic. And in fact, the types of people who believe in it happen to be well educated and successful.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I find so ironic, is that there still seems to be so much reluctance. Now, mainstream media has kind of grabbed a hold of this topic. If you go back to the Tic Tac video back in late 2017, mainstream media has kind of grabbed a hold of this, and they seem to be more willing to cover this, and I think that's a step in the right direction. But why do you think amongst some of the scientific circles and academic circles we still have to deal with this kind of negative stigma?
Well, academia is like any other culture, so they get trained, and they get trained in a way of thinking, and then they take that way of thinking into the research. And a lot of times what they do is they put their framework of research onto the data. And what happens, this is something that I learned from James, one of the scientists I cover in my book. And he's, world-renowned scientist. And he basically says, a lot of times with my graduate students, they will try to cover up the data that doesn't fit their hypothesis. But I show them that data, and I tell them, this is where you're going to find the important, what needs to be found. This, which doesn't fit, is what's going to help you get your dissertation finished. This will get you your job. And so I think that a lot of times when academics are trained, and it takes them between 3 to 6, sometimes 10 years to get their PhD, they get out and they do what they do to get a job, and they kind of do, which is why I'm saying that it was important for me to have this academic freedom, which is called tenure, right? This academic freedom to actually say, wait a minute, a lot of very, very successful people who are brilliant are studying this, and they absolutely believe in it, and I think this is worthy to look at. And so the people you're talking about who wrote that article last year in the New York Times, Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean, they are definitely people who are brave, because they're journalists, and they're going out there and they're putting their own reputation. It happens in journalism too. So they're putting their own reputations out on the line, basically stating this is happening. There are government programs that study this. They, provide millions and millions of dollars to understand it. It is a thing. It is a fact. That's what they brought that up. And I thought I loved it when they did that. And that was Christmas time last year, not this, this last Christmas, but the year before. Right. It was a great time.
Yeah, and I agree. It's promising to see that mainstream media is at least willing to report on this, and I've seen Fox News and CNN with follow-up reporting with David Fravor on there, them interviewing him, and he was, I think, the commander of the squadron that was involved in that incident. So it is very reassuring to see that. You kind of, it sounds like from, I've heard you in a few other interviews, it sounds like you kind of fell into researching this topic kind of by accident. And can you talk a little bit about that journey and how you kind of fell into researching the UFO phenomena?
Sure. So I started researching it in about late 2011, 2012, beginning of 2012. And to tell you the truth, if in 2010 you had brought up the topic of UFOs to me, I would have kicked you out of my office. I would have said, "Get out! Don't get. You're a crack or something like that." I mean, I was one of those people who had a pretty closed mind about it. I had finished. My specialty is Catholic history, and I just finished a book about the Catholic doctrine of purgatory, which is a doctrine that Catholics practiced for very long time, hundreds, if not 1,000 years, and then dismissed. Like in the 1960s, all of a sudden, people don't practice it anymore since the Vatican II is called the 1960s. And so purgatory is this place where you go, your soul goes after you die, and you're not good enough to go to heaven, but you're not going to hell either. So it's this place where your soul purges itself. It goes through a process of purification in order to get into heaven. And so I wanted to know, and if you travel through Europe, all through the cathedrals, you'll see that there are special places within churches and cathedrals there where people would do devotions to the souls in purgatory. They would basically pray their aunt or grandmother or something out of purgatory. And this was something that was practiced amongst Catholics universally, all over the world. So I wanted to know, well, wow, what happened to that doctrine? So I started to do some research in this, and this, again, was, it takes a long time for academics to write a book because they have to get source. They can't just say anything. They actually have to have proof for what they say. So what I did was I spent about 10 years on the book, and I went through various archives and reports, and I started from about, 1,200 on up. And I went through different languages, and I looked at this is mostly in the Western tradition, some of it later Canadian and North American. And what I found was that there were many, many tales of aerial phenomena. And I thought, whoa, wow, interesting. So I would put these I would basically make a file for these things. I didn't actually understand them. I thought, okay, well, people are seeing a lot of things in the sky, and a lot of these things seem communicative, like they talk to people. And sometimes they talk to them psychically, like they're somehow communicating with them without words. And so I would, take these things down or write them down. And then at the end of that book, that research, I wrote up my book. And I included one or two of those in the book, but not a lot. But I had this huge log of these from hundreds of years of Catholic history. And so I thought, wow, I have no idea what this means. So I turned in my manuscript, again, published by Oxford. I turned it in, and I showed it to a colleague of mine. We were having coffee. And I said, what do you think of this stuff? And he looked through it, and he kind of took his time and read through it. He's also, knows what he's looking at. And he said, strangely to me, this looks like a Steven Spielberg film. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, these are UFOs. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, these are UFOs. And so I pretty much just dismissed him. I thought, he's crazy. So I didn't think about it until the next day. He pointed out to me that there was a UFO conference in our, very close to where I lived, and that I should probably go. And I thought, why not? I'll go to this UFO conference. So I went. And when I went, I heard experiencers, people who have had these experiences. And I heard Chris Bledsoe, who's a well-known experiencer and actually lives very close to me. And I realized that the experiences that they were having were they seemed in a pattern. They seemed very similar to these anecdotes from the 1200s, the 1300s, the 1400s, and they didn't seem to deviate that much. And so when you see this type of data, it alerts you that there's something going on here. And so I thought, wow, I think I have to turn my attention to this. And that's when I began my study.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how you've kind of went from being someone who would not be involved in this subject at all to someone who's inquiring and researching it. I think that's great. One of the things that I wanted to ask, and well, before I do that, I just kind of want to share a little anecdotal story first. And when I was working on my master's degree program, we're talking about 10 years back, the instructor, and it was an online master's program, we had a couple of discussion group assignments, and one dealt with the JFK assassination. The second one was and this was an ethics and intelligence course. So the second topic was, and I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Stephen Greer, but yeah. it was about Dr. Stephen Greer and the Disclosure Project and all of the federal government and military witnesses he had assembled to go try and testify before Congress. So interestingly enough, this was discussion group assignments in a master's degree course. And, I had already had interest in the UFO topic for many years, so obviously I gravitated to that discussion group assignment. I loved it. I was also surprised to find that a lot of the people that were in the course were fairly open to at least discussing it. Now, that doesn't mean that they were sold on the idea that UFOs and aliens were visiting us and that the government was covering it up. But I guess where I'm getting at with this is in university settings, now, like in some of the courses you teach, does this topic come up, and is this being discussed, and even is this covered in university courses now?
It's covered in university courses as a social phenomenon because it is one. It's usually covered as kind of like a post-Cold War historical phenomenon. That said, it's also, and this is what my book is about, it's also covered by academics secretly. So academics have, and that's why I use a lot of references to Fight Club, because in Fight Club, it's well known enough as a movie to know that the first rule of Fight Club is not to talk about Fight Club. Second rule, not to talk about it. So there are people who do study it and who are academics, but study it in secret, and they won't share unless if they do share what they know. They won't call them UFOs. They won't call them extraterrestrials. They will just share the data, the scientific data, which is anomalous. And the data won't fit the paradigms that we have for them. But some of these professors and academics are of such a caliber that they cannot be ignored, and they're invited to conferences, all over the world. And so the data is being shared. The public doesn't know it because they don't read that kind of work. They don't read academic journals. They don't know, unless it says UFO. Think about it. You want to know about UFOs. What are you going to type into the internet? You're not going to type in specific codes for the, what type of metals or something like that that these things could be perhaps made of. But you're going to type in the word UFO, and from there you're going to get a lot of information that's not accurate. And so what I found was that there is indeed what Jacques Vallée has called an invisible college of academics who study it and make headway and create technologies from it. But what changes, Jacques Vallée writes his Invisible College book in the 1970s, and what changes from the 1970s to now is that it's no longer, where these scientists share their knowledge. They're more compartmentalized, and they actually don't talk about it. They do the research. They do their little part of the research, but they don't actually tell each other what they're learning. And then someone else comes along and takes what they have and brings it to another, compartment. And, so I don't know if there's like a wizard behind the scenes who knows it all. I haven't found that person. All I know is that there is a fight club of ufology now. There's a fight club of academics who study the phenomena. And the general public aren't privy to that information. I'm not privy to it either. I just know that it exists.
That's quite interesting, and the thing that I found even more interesting out of what you just talked about is the fact that it sounds like it almost sounds like I worked in the intelligence community. I'm a retired Air Force officer, and I worked in the intel community. It's very compartmentalized. What you just explained and very stovepiped. What you just explained sounds kind of like the government. And people who work in, sensitive programs. It's very compartmentalized. Some people don't know what other people are doing on projects, and, it's all strict, need-to-know basis. But what you just described sounds very similar to that. And I guess the next thing I would say is if they're doing this research and they're not really sharing it amongst their peers a whole lot, how beneficial is that research?
Okay, so this is where you get people who come in and somehow, I hate to use this word, but I don't know if you know this word, grok, get the big picture of it, only because they've met several people who don't know each other but are in different programs and can kind of see how these programs then work together and get it. Like, okay, so if they're doing this and they're doing this, this must mean this. And those are the people that are probably most concerning, because they get it, but they don't have clearances. They're not protected. So it's a kind of, there were several times in the research when I decided, I don't think I want to do this research. This seems dangerous even. And, I didn't think that I should continue, but certain things would pull me back in. And so I've actually, since the book was published, it was published on February 20th, and since then I have received a lot of emails from people in the intelligence community, and a lot of them have said, you got it, this is true. And then I received, this is interesting too, I did receive a really long email from a person who is a woman in the intelligence community, and she said, no, this couldn't happen. If you think that there's such a big secret like, ET or some type of non-human intelligence that we're studying, she said, this is not a secret that the intelligence community could keep. Take my word for it. I am in intelligence, and this is what I do. So I wanted to respond to her, and so I got her email address, and I sent it from my web, I have a website, AmericanCosmic.com, and I sent it back to her, and her email bounced back, and I thought, well, that's odd. So I took her email address, and I sent it from my university account because I really wanted to talk to her. And again, it bounced back. So I thought, okay, well, that's an interesting, she's not even real. Or she used a completely fake account or something to send me that email. And why would she want to send that email to me if she didn't want to engage with me?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit about, so the book, the title is UFOs, Religion and Technology. I want to get into the religious aspect of this because I think that's a fascinating part of this. But on your site, it says your book reveals how beliefs in UFOs and is the religion of the technological age. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that statement?
Yes. So this is where people who are religious might get pretty angry at me. Now, first, let me preface this by saying that I am a religious person. So but when you get a PhD in religion becomes somewhat complicated because, you read the original text. They don't say what they tell you in Sunday school or anything like that. So that's the first thing I have to say. The second thing I have to say is that I believe that religions are things that morph through time. And I believe that because I've written about it and I have sources to show that it's true. Like the case of purgatory, I made that case in that book. The people that study religious studies, there aren't many of us, but we're not theologians. We don't, we're not a lot of us aren't practitioners of religion. Some of us are. Some of us are ministers. Some of us are atheists. We are interdisciplinary. We use everything we could possibly use to understand religion: archaeology, sociology, history, science. And so my position is this: is that I went to grad school in 1990s, and I was in Silicon Valley. And I grew up in California in Silicon Valley, and I was among the first of the young kids to get computers in their classrooms. And we were among the first universities to have email and that kind of thing. So I knew that whatever was happening here in terms of technology was changing the very fabric of our society, and it would impact everything. And now, I'd always been interested in religion. And if you look back at different religions, you see how they're formed through their environments. It's not a coincidence that you have Hinduism in India, or you have, Christianity in Europe, or, what I'm saying? It's like these religions emerge from their environments, and in many ways, they're what we would call, they're local religions, right? They are formed within certain environments. So my position in writing the book was that technology is going to change how we are religious. It's going to form a different type of religiosity. And we see that. We see a religion called Jediism, right? There's now a religion about Star Wars. It's called Jediism. We see these things called fiction-based religions. We see religions, UFO types of religions, Raelianism and stuff like that. Okay, so Scientology. So my point was that beyond these types of like tribalistic religions, we have now what is a religiosity. It's kind of like a more of a free-form democratic type of religion where you don't have like a top-down type of guy, like the Buddha or Jesus kind of telling you. You have like a more Stephen Greer type contact key movement, where these deities or whatever you want to call them, these extraterrestrials or superhuman, non-human intelligences are contacting humans individually, normal humans, not like prophets. And all of these people are becoming, influenced by their experiences of these things. So this is a new type of religiosity. It's also bolstered by media technologies. So, all of us, you, me, our parents, we grew up, they grew up with Star Trek. We grew up with Star Wars. Our kids are growing up with Star Wars, So what we have is like a whole framework for understanding kind of a galactic type of cosmos. And so American Cosmic is basically about this new form of religion. And what I do is I don't actually study the people who are like, the normal contactees that we study, but I study the scientist contactees because they are making the most interesting impact and influence on us because of their technologies, which they believe they're back engineering from alien artifacts. And so, a lot of our technologies that we're incorporating into our bodies or into our actual technologies that we walk around with, our monoliths, right, like our iPhones or our black mirrors, our TV screens or computer screens, these technologies are created by a lot of people in Silicon Valley who have belief in ET intelligence and that they're somehow downloading this and back engineering it into our culture. So it's not just a mental thing. It's not just, that's my point. It's not just a belief structure, it's a practice. It's also material. It's a material culture.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, well, first of all, I guess this would depend on your definition of religion. I actually went out there and researched it. I noted a couple of different religions out there. I mean, definitions rather of religion, and I guess this one was probably the hardest for me to grapple with because I don't think personally that the UFO phenomena for me could be a religion. But that's just my notion or my idea of what religion is. And when I think of religion, I think of a deity and I think of a creator. So that, I guess, trying to understand that aspect of it was hard for me because it is a phenomena, and for me, it is a foregone conclusion that it's a real phenomena. I just kind of struggle with that aspect of it as it being a religion.
Yeah, I think you have to read the book in order to understand that there are probably within my field about 50 definitions of religion, because religion, here you have Buddhism, which actually doesn't even have a god, right? So, and then you have you have Western traditional religions like Islam and Christianity and Judaism, which does have a creator god. And then you have other types of religions that has a force as a creator. So, there are so many different types of religion, and that's my point, is that religions evolve from their environment.
Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is, there in Christianity, and I come from a Christian background, so like you are a person of faith as well. Was this, for me, it's been really hard to reconcile the two, even though, I find it such a fascinating topic, and for me, there's just no way I couldn't delve into it. But I'm just wondering about, for you personally, was that really hard for you to reconcile your faith and delving into this and researching it?
Not at all, no. So the tradition that I come from, my mother is Jewish and my father was Irish Catholic. And I grew up going to Catholic schools and being influenced by sisters who actually were helping people in Central America who were dying and disappearing and that kind of thing in the 1990s. And so for me, I didn't come with a preconceived notion of what a God or God, what the universe is like. Instead, you have to understand also that I've studied philosophy. So in philosophy, there's this question of, why is there something rather than nothing? Like, why are we, the very fact that we are here is quite an amazing thing. And so that never left my mind. So when I study, and, even within the Catholic Church, you have people like Brother Guy Consolmagno, who's the director of the Vatican Observatory, which is a space observatory, one of the oldest ones in our tradition. And he basically says, well, there could possibly be, the Catholic Church doesn't have a position on ETs. And they say they could possibly be. And if they are, there's no reason why the creator or God didn't create them. It's very much like, and Catholics are generally, I hate to say this, they're not so literate about their faith. A lot of Catholics out here in the South don't believe in evolution, whereas the Catholic Church is pro. It says, yes, there's natural selection, and there's this thing called theistic, evolution, in which case, God puts in place these kinds of things. Okay, so that said, this doesn't, basically when I went through and looked at the Catholic tradition, what I found was that a lot of the stories that are told, like St. Francis of Assisi or Sister of Avila, Teresa of Avila, if you look at their angel encounters and encounters with beings of light and things like that, they really, really look like John Mack's Abduction book. And I even interviewed one of John Mack's subjects who was an art professor. And, he said, well, this is more like an angel thing than an abduction thing. Like, I don't feel like I was abducted. I felt like I was, you know, I encountered something like sacred. So a lot, and so does Chris Bledsoe, you know, the guy in North Carolina near me who had his experience. He said, this was a spiritual experience for me. So a lot of people experience their UFO sightings or whatnot as beautiful, you know, wonderful. There are some who experience them as very bad and very evil. And, you know, so I mean, the framework of religion fits here within the study of the phenomena. Even if you study like the craft, like if you go back to St. Francis of Assisi and you look at the original source of the stigmata, which is called the wounds of Christ, you know, you have this guy out, this is in the 1200s, and he's out on a mountain, and he's praying with his friend, Brother Leo, and out of nowhere comes this thing out of the sky, and it zaps him and gives him these bloody wounds. And he later dies from those wounds. And, you know, this is not unsimilar to what happens to people who report UFO encounters today. But he even though he dies, he considers it to be a spiritual experience. I mean, it's a very strange thing. And I have to say that, you know, you do have to have an open mind in order to study it. But in no way does it take away any kind of faith I have in love, the beauty of life, and, you know, do unto others as they have them do unto you kind of thing. You know, I still believe in those, and I believe in them even more after I've studied this.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I just another real quick, and I'll make it quick, another anecdotal story to kind of make a point here is that when I was still in the military, another military officer, colleague of mine, I went into his office to talk with him. And up on his computer screen there is Dr. Stephen Greer talking about the Disclosure Project. Now, this was an individual that is a fairly conservative Christian, has a Bible by his desk, that sort of thing. And so, you know, I said, oh, interesting. So you're looking into the Disclosure Project? He said, yeah, a friend sent this to me. And although I believe it's just demonic. So I'm just kind of curious from your vantage point, are the conservative Christian base a lot less likely to accept this kind of phenomena? And the reason why I say that is just going back to that case in point. I've talked to other Christians as well, and they seem very reluctant based on that because it's kind of this notion that you're being deceived, or that, you know, it's got to be something demonic and deceived because it doesn't fit the paradigm.
Yeah, so in the case of, again, Chris Bledsoe, what I found was that he had a very intense UFO experience. I think it was in 2007, and he was reluctant to come out to talk about it, but he finally did because he felt like he had to. And he was part of a Baptist church, and they ostracized him and told him that it was demonic. And it put a lot of pressure on him and his family, and he went through a lot of pain and suffering because of it. And I had met him right as he was going through that. And so I introduced him to my friend, Dr. George Zervos, who is a scholar of the New Testament and an Orthodox priest. And he talked to him too. And so we were able to kind of like help him through that process of understanding that these things that he's experienced are not, they're not, I mean, we've had these experiences throughout human history, right? So he's just one of a bunch of people who've had these experiences. They're extraordinary experiences. That doesn't make them demonic. So, yeah, I think that for a lot of people who have, you know, I mean, it's not, listen, Curry, it's not just those Christians who think that. It's also many scientists who think that. And, you know, many people who just, like me even, when I was in 2010, if somebody talked to me about it, I would, like, shut down. So, I mean, there's a lot of ignorance out there about it, and it has nothing to do with really, you know, what position, are you Christian, are you atheist, are you this, are you that? I think that there's just, you know, the government in the 1950s and 60s did a number on the American public when they co-opted the perception management of UFOs and said that anybody who believes in them is crazy and they're tin hat type people. And what my book starts off, the introduction of my book basically talks about Rob Bigelow, who's a billionaire and creates viable space habitats that NASA uses and the Russians use. And basically, he's on 60 Minutes, and he says, the interviewer says, "Don't you think people will think it's crazy if you say you believe in UFOs?" And he says, "I don't care. I'm not going to say it on the radio of what he actually said." He said, "I don't care." He goes, "It's not going to change the truth." So you have a lot. I've never met so many people who were successful and had amazing credentials than when I went into this study. And I think that was the first real revelation for me, was that this is not fringe. This is completely elite. Like, the elite believe this. The people who are actually creating the technologies, benefiting from the technologies, getting rich off the technologies, these are the people who believe.
Right, and that's what's fascinating to me as well, and I think it's so encouraging that people like yourself are doing research on this subject. Well, doesn't sound like you take any specific position on it. But the other thing that I find interesting is you've already mentioned one of the early UFO researchers, Dr. John Mack. You've got Dr. David Jacobs, and I would say they've kind of reached different conclusions based on their research. I think one is kind of saying that he thinks there may be some sort of, nefarious agenda here going on with the ETs based on abduction research. And I don't think John Mack took that approach. I think he saw that they may have been a little bit more, had a little bit more peaceful intentions. I'm wondering, based off the research you've done and the scientists you've interviewed, have you found that there's a lot of differing viewpoints about the phenomena and what the agendas are out there in the research you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. The two people that I start the first two chapters of my book with, one is affiliated with our space program, has worked on almost every space shuttle mission, and he believes that they're benign, that these entities, or whatever you want to call them, have good intentions, and he's only had positive experiences with them. The other researcher is a world-renowned scientist, and he believes the opposite. He has seen the worst of what they can do, and he sees kind of the St. Francis zapping, hurting people and that kind of thing. So he has the opposite idea. And so my own position is neutral in the sense that I report what I've observed from what these people are saying, and it appears that John Mack thought that they were, trying to help humanity evolve. However, if you read his book, there's a lot of really nasty things that happen in his book, and you're like, really, you think that? And then, of course, Jacobson, of course, he says, there are really, this is a terrible thing, and there are other researchers who think that as well. So my own position is that I don't know. I mean, I have to be honest. I honestly do not know what the agenda is. Perhaps there are, like, I talked to Brenda Densler. She is a PhD from Duke, and she wrote her dissertation on this subject. She has a book called The Lure of the Edge. And she basically believes, or she has said to me, I don't know if she believes this still, I can't speak for her, but she has said perhaps there are different types of these things, just like, there are different species here on Earth. Maybe there are different types of these other kinds of non-human intelligences, and some are good and some are bad. And so I don't, this would be, as I was leaving New Mexico, I went to New Mexico to a alleged alien crash site, and I went there with two scientists. The two scientists who were in the first two chapters of my book, and I had to be blindfolded to go because it was a secret place. And so I got out there, and I do know that one of the scientists said to me, Diana, 100 years ago, we would be calling these angels and demons.
Hey everybody, Curry here. I really hope you enjoy listening to the Passion for the Paranormal podcast show, but did you know that you can actually get paid just for listening to this podcast? I know it sounds insane, but it's true. I just discovered this free new app called PODCOIN, and it literally pays you to listen to podcasts. So here's how this works. You listen to podcasts and you earn PODCOIN while you listen. Then you turn that PODCOIN in for gift cards at places like Amazon or Starbucks. And if you're a really good person, you can even donate that PODCOIN to charity. The more you listen, the more you earn. So here's what you do. Download the app right now on your iPhone or Android device, and I have a special code for you to use. Simply use the code paranormal, and you'll get 300 PODCOIN just for signing up. And if you listen to it enough, you can actually get a cappuccino at Starbucks or an Amazon gift card on us. So go ahead and go listen to this podcast or virtually any podcast on PODCOIN and sign up with that code paranormal. Right, and the other thing that I wanted to talk about is well, first of all, are some of these scientists that you've interviewed, have they been directly related in research and development or other government programs?
I mean, I'm not going to answer that.
Okay.
Probably. So, I don't know. If they're in those programs, they can't tell me.
Right. So they probably have to be close-hold about that. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to ask is, getting back to this, now you mentioned there's a character that you mentioned you refer to as Tyler D. And
yes.
As kind of I guess a code for a person that you've interviewed and that you've talked with. How does he play as a key figure in the book?
Yeah, Tyler D is a person who, like I said, this is the person who took James and I out. James is the scientist, and Tyler D is also a material scientist, and also affiliated with our space program from way back. Part of the Challenger episode, friends with Judy Resnick when she, passed away in that tragic episode. And this, he asked me to go to New Mexico because he thought I should see physical evidence of what I had been studying my whole life. And so I didn't actually want to go. I thought it was odd. I was a little concerned. Like I said, this is nothing like this had ever happened to me when I was studying Catholic history. So, nobody ever wanted to take me to a place blindfolded. So I was thinking, this is a little bit out of my comfort zone. So I said I wouldn't go unless someone else went with me. And he said, well, it's entirely out of the case. And so I proposed James. And I knew that if he did a little research, he'd see that James was actually the better person than me to go. And so he did. And I said, I told James, and James said, oh, I definitely want to go. And so we waited for about 2 or 3 days, and Tyler got back to us and said, yes, James can go. So James and I were blindfolded, and we were both taken out we went to Albuquerque, and then, we had about a 4.5-hour drive, and then the last 40 minutes or 45 minutes were blindfolded. And we got out to this place, and we got out, and we had to wear certain types of clothing because there were rattlesnakes out there, and it was a creepy but beautiful place. And then when we did find we had metal detectors that were specified to certain types of metals and things like that. Like, they were not metal detectors. Not that I've seen a lot of metal detectors, to tell you the truth, but they were high-tech metal detectors. And so we got out there, and we spent all day out there, and we got some parts. And so we came back. We decided James was going to take the parts through the airport security, and Tyler told us what would happen. And indeed, it all happened just as he said. Tyler goes through security. He doesn't even have to go through security. He just goes on the other side. No one stops him. And so James and I, normal people, have to go through security. And so James gets stopped. I get through. I'm sweating. I'm like, wow, what's going on? And so Tyler's like, don't worry, it's going to be all right. So we get out, we go through, we get out, and so, Tyler D is a person who's had a very esteemed career creating technologies based on what he believes are is information from non-human intelligences. He doesn't understand what they are. He doesn't know if they're ETs or if they're angelic or what they are. He just knows that they're not human. He gets information from them, and he's had an incredibly stellar career.
Getting back to the discussion we had about the different theories about what's going on here, agendas, that sort of thing, I've heard, and Linda Moulton Howe was just on Coast to Coast recently and said she had a government insider that said that there's 3 different ET civilizations and that have interest in Earth and what's going on here, and they are to a certain extent at odds with each other. So I found that interesting. Perhaps there's more than one civilization, and again, I'm not going to say it's a foregone conclusion that we're even dealing with extraterrestrial. This could be interdimensional. There's so many different possibilities out there. But I'm just wondering, based on your research, have you delved into the possibility that we're dealing with more than one ET civilization here?
Right. So my position is that, so whatever it is that is interfacing with humans, as Jacques Vallée said in his seminal work of 1968, Passport to Magonia, they're most likely, whatever it is we're dealing with, most likely we just don't have a lot of information about, because they are different. They're not like we have our categories of species, genus, phylum, domain, and those kinds of things, and family and things like that. These things are beyond, we don't even have a category for them. So the idea that we can say specifically, this is where they're from or this is what they do, I think that I would prefer to think of them as interdimensional, to tell you the truth, if I were to say. Now, remember, I'm an academic. I'm not speaking for my university, nor am I speaking for Oxford University Press. This is my own opinion. I would suggest that I think our world is so incredibly, think of human civilization itself in the scheme of the billions of years that the universe has been here, right? So what do we know? We don't know a lot. We're just at the very beginning of knowing about other types of things that could possibly be interacting with us. And so perhaps we just have to keep an open mind. I don't think we can make ready conclusions, to tell you the truth. I think that that's probably an error.
Right. No, and I.
But I do.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I do want to say this, though. No. I do want to say this, that in my study of purgatory, I did a little bit of research into what's called angelology in the Catholic tradition, because it had to do with my ideas about what I was writing about for purgatory. And what I found interesting was that there was a lot written about angels in between like 1200 and about 1500, right before kind of science took over. And a lot of the scientist theologians in the Western tradition talked about planetary intelligences. And they also talked about different types of angels and what types of species they were. Like they said that there were entirely different types of species of angels and planetary intelligences. So I found that all quite interesting when I was reading that. I was like, wow, I didn't know that that's what they believed back in that time period. But that is what they believed, And so here we're still talking about it in different terms, but similar.
Right, and you talked a little bit in another interview about how this phenomena comes into play with the early space programs, both the U.S. and Russian space programs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So, of course, I mostly do historical work. So I started this book, because this book is not a history, but it is. I did start as a history. So I was looking at our own space program, and then it intersects, of course, with the Russian space program, because each of us has the most viable space program on Earth, the Russian and the U.S. space program, which, in fact, are quite intertwined. And so when I did a little research into the beginning of space, technology and rocket technology, I found that the people who came up with those equations had very similar ideas to the scientists that I was currently studying. And there's a great book out there. I always plug this book because I actually named my own book in homage to his book. Is Henry, no, I always call him Henry, but a Dr. Young wrote Russian Cosmos, and I think it's George Young. And he wrote The Russian Cosmos, and it's a book about the history of the beginning of the Russian space program. And I did a little history. I was doing historical work on our space program, and I found, work on Jack Parsons and, Jet Laboratory, and things like that, and JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And I found that their ideas, although they were different in kind, like the Russians were more specifically, they were strangely eugenicists, but they were like Christian eugenicists. But they believed that they were in contact with angelic beings who were downloading to them rocket technology information. And then Jack Parsons believed that, he was not Christian, and he was an LA, Los Angeles, like New Agey kind of guy before the New Age. And he was actually friends with L. Ron Hubbard. Well, L. Ron Hubbard ran off with his wife. So he didn't have a really good time with him, but they were friends. And he would do rituals out in the desert to try to access what he believed were extraterrestrial intelligences that would download rocket technology information to him. So once I started to study this, I was super surprised because I didn't know. I thought we just had kind of this vanilla historical space program, but that's far, far, far from the truth.
The individuals like Edgar Mitchell, who was an Apollo, one of the Apollo 14 astronauts, was a big believer in this phenomena. Yeah, I find it interesting that there seems to be more and more information trickling out that seems to suggest that NASA and our government in general knows a little bit more than has been led on to. I think that's fascinating stuff, though. The book is, again, can you talk about how people can find your book, the website, and anywhere else they can find your research and your work?
Sure. So my book is available on Oxford University Press's website, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Basically, just type in American Cosmic, and you'll get a million hits there on where you can find it. I think the least expensive place to buy it right now is at Target, just to let your listeners know. And there are various modes. There's an ebook, there's a hardcover book, and there's also an audio book, which the woman who did the audio version doesn't sound at all like me. So just to let you know that. And also, I have a website called AmericanCosmic.com. And I used to be on social media, and I used to have I was pretty active on social media. But after the publication of the book, things got really pretty weird, so I just had to get off of social media. But I will be on it again in about a few months down the way. And I've had a lot of positive response to the book from critics, like mainstream critics, and all kinds of people, mainstream people that you wouldn't think. I wrote the book as an academic book, frankly, for academics, and then I was really surprised when it kind of hit up there on number one on Amazon for a while, next to Bill Cooper's book. And I love Bill Cooper's stuff. He was really an amazing person, and his is number one, like forever, it seems. And so I was next to Bill Cooper, and I was like, no, that's just incredible for me. And so that was cool. And it was also in, believe it or not, because I think it's kind of a funny book as well. It was in comedy. It was rated in like number 10 or something in comedy. So
wow.
I think it's also somewhat funny.
So
strangely enough.
Yeah.
So here you have, it's not a normal academic book. Let's put it that way.
So you've delved into this topic in this research now. Are you kind of you mentioned that it's hard to pull away from. Are you planning on doing more research, perhaps writing more books about the subject, and are you pretty intertwined with it now and forevermore?
Ah, yes. What about you?
Yeah, and I cover the subject. I am a paranormal investigator as well. I'm really involved in all aspects of the paranormal and reading and covering them on the show. I am definitely always interested in this subject and always trying to read new material when I can. But are you expecting to put out any more work or any more books about the UFO phenomena in your research?
Yeah, so that's my point, is that once you start to get into it, it's almost impossible to get out. I mean, I think that this is kind of like a cliche. We go, okay, I mean, when I started to get into it, I was like, this is ridiculous. What am I doing? And then the more I got into it, the more I realized, oh my goodness, my whole worldview has shifted, and I can't go back now. I can't go back because now I know all of this. I know people take it seriously. Our government takes it seriously. A lot of people that think it's ridiculous are wrong, and I'm not going to go out there and basically say, look what's happening, this is happening. No, I'm not going to do that, and I wrote a fairly sober book with tinges of humor in it, about it, but also, yeah, I'm going to write another book about it. It might have to be a fictional book, but based on true events.
Right, and one more thing.
The reason is because of various things. Like I'm going to mention Bill Cooper and John Mack specifically. And if your viewers know it, or your listeners know anything about those guys, they'll know what I'm talking about.
Right, and just one other thing I wanted to mention, or perhaps ask, is you hear a lot of talk about disclosure and will the government disclose anytime soon about what they know about this phenomena. I personally don't think it's going to happen for various reasons. One, I would kind of like to get your take on whether you think the government's going to come out and talk about at least at some level, maybe in the near future, about what they know about this. I doubt they're ever going to come out and just tell us everything they know, obviously, probably for national security reasons and other reasons as well. And are people ready to accept the truth as a whole in the United States? Are people willing and ready to accept the truth about this phenomena?
Okay, yeah, those are all good questions. So I'm going to take them one at a time, but backwards. So the last question you asked, are the people ready? Heck yeah. I mean, I think people have been ready for a long time. So, you have, like I said, more than 50% of people, like 80% of young people ready. They already believe it. Okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing is a government disclosure. The government has disclosed that they study this. They've already disclosed that. What more do we want? That they're going to say what they know? I don't think they know a lot. I do think that they have various programs of studying it, and that these, you have, like I said, as you know, it's very compartmentalized, so a lot of people know a lot about one type of thing, and very few people know, or if anybody knows, the whole story or the big story. I think that there are some elements that have to do with what's called the Stanford Research Institute, like psychic elements that have to do with it. That is out of control in certain respects. Government can't control that, so they don't want to let that out of the bag type thing. And I also think that for people who already believe, they don't need the government to tell them what to believe, right? So I think that Gary Nolan, that professor from Stanford, was on MJ Benias's I forgot his website podcast, and basically said, why are you all waiting? And so my friend Robbie Graham, too, he said, why are you waiting for the government to tell you what you already know?
Right, and that's kind of the way I look at it as well. It's, like I said, that it's a real phenomenon is a foregone conclusion for me, and I think many, many other people. Do we really need, especially with efforts like Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy and other things going on like that, people like yourself researching it, and more credible people coming out doing research and talking about it. I agree. I don't think we need the government to come out. I think some would say it's been soft disclosure. There's been no official public statement saying we're studying UFOs. At least from what I've gathered, there hasn't been. We had the release of the video back in 2017, but that was really Tom DeLonge and To the Stars Academy efforts, I think, through FOIA processes and whatnot. Dr. Pasulka, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, talking with you. Amazing research you've done. I'm really looking forward to getting a copy of the book and reading it. Again, thank you so much for joining me on the show, and I'm looking forward to any further research or work you have coming out down the road.
Well, thanks so much, Curry. I really enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, great. Have a great night. Thank you. Okay, so big thanks to Dr. Diana Pasulka for joining me on the show tonight, and I really hope you enjoyed that discussion. And please make sure you join me next episode when Karen Anderson will be joining me. And Karen is a psychic and renowned animal communicator, and she is author of the best-selling book, The Amazing Afterlife of Animals, Messages and Signs from Our Pets on the Other Side. Interesting new topic covering on the show, and I'm really looking forward to that episode. So I hope you'll join me. And once again, thank you for tuning into the show, and have a great night, everyone.